The chandelier above the dining table glittered like stars, its crystals scattering light across walls painted with the finest ivory shades. Plates of untouched food sat cooling under silver domes. Yet in the middle of the grand room, silence pressed heavier than the opulence around it. At the head of the table sat Amelia Hart, a woman the world admired. A millionaire, a visionary business leader. Truth, a single mother, who had climbed her way from nothing to everything. She had houses spread across continents, cars that most only saw in magazines, and closets filled with dresses that could grace any red carpet. Truth. But none of it mattered tonight. None of it could silence the echoing emptiness of her daughter's eyes. 8-year-old Grace sat across from her, small hands folded tightly in her lap, her golden curls framing a face too serious for her age. Amelia had told her tonight's dinner was important. She had carefully selected a man seated at Amelia's side, a polished executive. Truth, a man with credentials and wealth that mirrored her own. But when Amelia looked at her daughter, waiting for a smile and approval, she was met with hesitation. Grace, with her innocent heart, seemed to see through what Amelia could not. "Sweetheart," Amelia's voice wavered as she reached across the gleaming table. "You deserve a father again. Someone who can protect you. Someone who can make us whole." The man beside her shifted, his confidence radiating like cologne, rehearsed laughter escaping his lips. But Grace didn't even glance at him. Instead, her eyes, those clear, searching eyes, filled with an H that pierced Amelia's chest. "I don't want him," Grace whispered. Amelia froze. For the first time in years, her carefully constructed world trembled. "Then who?" Amelia asked softly, almost pleading. Grace's small voice was steady. "The man who fixed our car." Amelia blinked, confusion flooding her face. "The mechanic." Grace nodded, and in that moment, something unexplainable stirred in the millionaire's heart. It had been 2 weeks earlier, when Amelia's chauffeured car broke down, just outside a small town on the edge of the city. The rain had been merciless, slapping against her windshield, drenching the streets. Stranded, Amelia had felt panic rise. The men she normally called were all unavailable. Then a tow truck appeared, pulling alongside with an unassuming figure stepping out. A man in oil-stained overalls, his hands rough from years of labor, his face softened by kind eyes. His name was Daniel. He didn't treat Amelia like she was untouchable, though he recognized her name instantly. Instead, he spoke gently to Grace, kneeling to her height, reassuring her that they would be safe and warm soon. He let Grace sit in his office while he worked on the car, offering her a cup of hot cocoa from an old vending machine. And though Amelia had been restless, impatient, she couldn't ignore the way her daughter clung to him, as though he carried a warmth she hadn't felt in years. That night, when Amelia tucked Grace into bed, her daughter whispered, "He smiled like Daddy used to." Amelia brushed it off then, convincing herself it was just a child's fleeting impression. But now, in her gilded dining room, her daughter's declaration struck deep. The following morning, Amelia found herself driving, without telling anyone, back to the little mechanic's garage. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was curiosity, truth, or perhaps it was the way Grace's voice had carried certainty. Something Amelia herself no longer trusted. The garage was modest, tucked between a diner and a hardware store. The smell of gasoline lingered in the air, and Daniel stood bent over a hood, humming softly to himself. His son, a boy around Grace's age, sat nearby with a math workbook, scribbling answers, and occasionally glancing at his father with admiration. Amelia watched quietly before stepping forward. Daniel looked up, startled to see her, and wiped his hands on a rag. "Miss Hart," he greeted politely, his tone respectful yet not fawning. "Just Amelia," she corrected before she could stop herself. It was then she noticed something. How his tired eyes carried a gentleness, that wasn't weighed down by greed or ambition. How he smiled not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And when Grace rushed forward from the car to hug him, Amelia realized this wasn't about her anymore. This was about what her daughter had felt, the unspoken recognition of love and safety in a stranger. Days turned into weeks, and despite Amelia's hesitation, she found herself drawn back to that garage. She learned that Daniel was a widower. Truth, raising his son alone after his wife's illness had taken her too soon. He worked long hours, barely scraping enough to keep the lights on, but his world revolved around his child. When Amelia watched him, she saw something no amount of wealth could buy: the purity of sacrifice, the strength of love untainted by pride. Grace and Daniel's son became inseparable, their laughter echoing in the dusty corners of the garage. And slowly, Amelia felt her own guarded heart unravel. Still, she battled herself. Could she, a woman who had conquered boardrooms and negotiations, allow herself to be vulnerable again to someone who had nothing but sincerity? The turning point came one stormy evening when Amelia's company faced a scandal. The media tore at her. Investors called her ruthless, and friends who once praised her vanished into silence. Exhausted, she sat alone in her car, tears streaming silently. Her phone buzzed endlessly, yet she couldn't breathe. She hadn't let herself break in years, but now it was unbearable. Her instinct told her to drive. Not home, not to her penthouse, but to that little garage. And when she arrived, Daniel didn't ask for explanations. He didn't offer business advice or platitudes. He simply opened the door, pulled out a chair, poured her a cup of tea, and said, "Truth, you don't have to be strong." Here. Those words, so simple, so ordinary, broke through walls she hadn't known were still standing. The children's laughter floated in from outside. And Amelia looked at Daniel, seeing him not as a mechanic, but as the anchor she didn't know she was searching for. In that quiet moment, Grace ran inside, her cheeks flushed from playing. She threw her arms around Amelia and whispered, "See, Mommy. He's the one." Amelia closed her eyes, holding her daughter tightly as realization washed over her. It wasn't about the riches or the titles. It was about love that healed, kindness that endured, and the unspoken truth a child's heart had recognized long before she could. And for the first time in her life, Amelia wasn't afraid of choosing differently. She wasn't afraid of letting love find her where she least expected it. Amelia had spent most of her life believing that happiness came wrapped in achievement. Awards, recognition, a growing empire. All of it had felt like progress, proof that she was doing life right. But now, standing in that small, grease-scented garage, she realized that happiness had nothing to do with success and everything to do with connection. Grace was still clinging to her, her little arms wrapped tight, as if afraid Amelia wouldn't believe her words. Daniel, quietly watching, had no idea of the storm inside Amelia's heart, the tug of war between the life she had built and the life she suddenly wanted. For days after, Amelia wrestled with it. Her friends wouldn't understand, her colleagues would whisper, "A millionaire with a mechanic." They'd call it reckless, beneath her. But every time she saw Grace's smile, when Daniel was around, every time she watched his son laugh freely with her daughter, something inside Amelia softened. The final nudge came on Grace's birthday. Amelia had planned a lavish party at a luxury hotel. Balloons, magicians, mountains of gifts. Yet as the hours stretched on, Grace sat quietly in her beautiful dress, her eyes searching the crowd as though something was missing. When Amelia knelt beside her and asked, "Sweetheart, aren't you happy?" Grace whispered, "I wish Daniel and Ben were here." The answer shattered Amelia's illusions. She realized her daughter didn't care for the glitz, the sparkle, or the extravagance. What she wanted most wasn't another gift or another party, it was a family. That night, Amelia drove straight to the garage. Daniel was still working, his sleeves rolled up, his hands covered in oil. She stepped out of her car, not as a millionaire, not as a woman in control, but as a mother ready to listen to her child's heart and her own. Daniel looked surprised to see her. But before he could speak, she blurted out, her voice trembling, "My daughter chose you, Daniel. And I think my heart did too." For the first time in years, Daniel was speechless. He set down his tools, wiped his hands, and walked toward her. "Amelia," he said gently, "I have nothing to offer you. No riches, no luxury, just honesty, truth, and the love of a man who'd give anything to protect his family." A tears welled in Amelia's eyes. "That's more than anyone's ever offered me." And then, as if the universe had been waiting, Grace and Ben ran from the back of the garage, their laughter filling the air. They grabbed Amelia and Daniel's hands, tugging them together, forcing them to stand side by side. From that moment on, life didn't transform overnight into perfection. It became something better. The four of them began spending weekends together. Trips to the park replaced boardroom meetings. Homemade dinners filled with laughter replaced silent, extravagant banquets. Grace started calling Ben her brother. And one evening, when Daniel fixed a squeaky hinge in Amelia's mansion, Grace tugged at her mother's dress and whispered with a grin, "See, Mommy. He even fixes things here." A month later, Amelia stood under an arch of white roses in her own garden, her hand in Daniel's. She looked at her daughter, beaming brighter than ever, and then at the man beside her. No diamonds, no glamour, just love that felt unshakable. When the vows were spoken, and the children cheered, Amelia finally understood the truth her daughter had known all along. The richest life wasn't the one filled with money, but the one filled with people who loved you without condition. Truth. As Daniel leaned down and kissed her, Grace and Ben clapped with joy, their laughter ringing through the evening air. For the first time in Amelia's life, she wasn't just wealthy. She was truly, completely whole.